Hi, everyone. My guest for this episode is a brilliant marketer. Her name is Annie Lee, and her background is in marketing leadership at places you may have heard of, like Twitch, Amazon Grocery, where she and I met, Pinterest, Microsoft. So, who's who of tech here. And she is currently the chief marketing officer at Brave Software. Brave has a private and secure browser. Perhaps you could call it a Web3 compatible browser, and it has a different user value proposition than the browsers that most of us use today. And so we start off talking about topics like why the world needs a new browser. We talk about Web3. We talk about Brave's interesting approach to advertising. Then we shift gears a bit and discuss knowing your customer and some of Annie's learnings from Amazon and Twitch, and then a whole bunch of other big picture items. If you hang to the end, we also touch on an article that Annie wrote in Adweek in the wake of shootings that took place in Atlanta in the beginning of 2021. It's around the 25-minute mark. I really recommend you tune in for that. And then also note I had a technical difficulty on my end towards the end of the pod, which required a little bit of editing finesse. So thanks if you noticed that, and also thanks to my amazing producers. All right, let's do it. Hi, Annie. How are you?
Hi, John. How are you? I'm doing well.
Good. Good to talk to you today. So, I need to know, why does the world need a new browser? And also, why should I care about Web3? Is it a real thing?
Yeah. So, most consumers don't realize how much of their browsing behaviors are being quote unquote sold on the internet by big tech companies. In a Web 2 world, which is prior to Web 3, platforms like Facebook have built an entire business model by using people's data and selling it under the guise of better targeting or better advertising. And they say it's more personalized, it's more relevant for the customer. And while this premise holds true, most users don't realize what they're consenting to when they sign up for new email accounts or social media platforms. And so at Brave, we're challenging this entire business model with a browser that blocks cookies, blocks trackers, blocks third-party ads. But when you opt into our own private native advertising, users receive 70% of our revenue through our rewards program. And that's because we believe that users should own their own attention and their own browser experience. Otherwise, we as consumers become the product of these big tech companies and they continue to profit from our data. We believe that the world needs a browser that puts users first, and Brave is the only browser in the market right now that puts the interest and choice in the user's hands first. And that includes users across the ecosystem.
Well, it's really cool that Brave's taking this new direction for a browser. I want to get into this more, but let me ask you, like, literally, how do some of these mechanics work? Because if I understand Brave, it's a browser, I'm anonymous, but then, like, I'm like signing into websites all the time. I'm using Gmail. So, is there a disconnect between those two things?
A bit, and if this is a question about how ads are being targeted, you may have heard of the phrase advertising in a cookieless world, and whether marketers like it or not, this is happening and we have to adopt this trend. Consumers want more privacy, and that's just the reality. And Apple has led the way as of late by stripping tracking across devices with iOS 14. And we've seen companies like Facebook feel the impact of this on their advertising. Google has announced the way they will be rolling out something similar for their Android device. And you know very intimately that multi-touch attribution has been a hard problem to solve, and it's about to get even more challenging. I would say even over the next few years, marketers will need to learn how to advertise without the comfort of having access to every attributable data, which means they have to diversify the channel mix and leaning more into first-party and native advertising platforms. I always say as trends go, what's old is new again, and so the old type of advertising is kind of coming back. And at Brave, the way it works is we innovate by bringing personalization from the edge with the user's own information and consent. So the consent part is really critical, and without using the user information ever leaving their own device. This runs counter to the status quo models that have monetized the internet to date. And beyond our ads platform, we've been introducing local personalization for Brave News, which is content that you see when you open the web. And we're also innovating on this front with Brave Search, which, it's our own independent search platform where you can search and not have all your click data being tracked. And our model not only protects the user privacy, but we also share the revenue with the user through our rewards program, like I mentioned earlier. And that's distributed through our token, which is called the Basic Attention Token, also short for BAT.
Okay, and that is that an altcoin? Is that I know you can actually buy and sell BAT on
Yeah,
Coinbase. So
yes,
yeah, so
yes, you
that's
can.
that's its own thing. So this hits all of the Web3 buzzwords: privacy, privacy, crypto, et cetera. I want to get more into kind of the user or consumer perspective because I feel like for me, I'm not super comfortable with like everyone knowing my data. At the same time, I've been kind of coached that there's this value exchange where
Hmm.
where the exchange is I'm letting people learn more about me in exchange for using Google, which is a really good search engine, and
Hmm.
those sorts of things. Or using Facebook, which is really excellent for me to connect with my friends. What research or data do you have sort of talking about how users' perspective on this value exchange is changing?
Yeah. If you haven't seen the documentary called The Social Dilemma, I think that opens, people's understanding of how it's actually working behind the scenes. I do believe that there was always good intention for these platforms to do good, like giving more access to information and allowing you to connect with your friends. But I think what it has evolved over time is what's really scary. And the documentary goes into some of the inner workings of that.
Yeah, when that came out, I think it was on Netflix. All of us with like 12-year-olds and stuff like that were like, oh my gosh, the world is going, it's going off the rails.
Yeah. And
Um,
I also think that
yeah.
Gen Z is really aware and in tune with what's happening on the internet. And they're also the generation that is not afraid to stand up for their own personal values. And you see how they are, spending their disposable income very differently than how previous generations have. And I saw a lot of that happening at Twitch.
So I'm trying to like parse out as a marketer. I'm saying to myself, in the future, there are going to be more people using browsers or interacting with my website that are totally anonymous. And and so how do I collect first party data on them? Can I, or is it like done through a token, kind of like an anonymous, or I don't even know if I'm using the words right, like a token on the Brave browser, and I'm targeting the token. Is that how I should think about it?
Actually, I think it's less about the fact that they're anonymous and more about giving them consent. So in the previous world, you're giving, people are giving consent through things like, I'm signing up for this site and I'm clicking off terms and conditions. But when was the last time you actually read through every word in a terms and conditions when you're signing up for a website? And so that is the
Never.
one key part is being very explicit about the consent. And then secondly, which is what Brave is standing for, is that there's a revenue share component where we are splitting that revenue with the user. So those two things are more critical than just the anonymous part.
Yeah. And so are you finding that a lot of people are opting into this value exchange, sort of like, I don't know that I want to call the ads incentivized, but that someone's saying, yeah, I'm interested in seeing an ad, and I'm fine with
Mhm.
seeing an ad, and I get a little bit of something in return for that.
Yeah. And so we call that the rewards program here at Brave, and we do find that people are opting in. They are earning that by just doing things like browsing the web, and so we do see that pattern happening. Yes.
Yeah, really, really cool. Okay, so you have a very interesting and amazing background at Twitch, Amazon Grocery, where you and I met, Pinterest, and what's interesting is people's personalities, at least at Twitch, were like at the center of what you market. At least that's what I took away from that, or maybe the center of what Twitch is marketing. And then kind of what was that like? What was the marketing challenge and opportunity there? And how big of a shift in mindset is it versus what you're doing today?
Yeah. By personalities, I'm going to assume you're referring to creators or influencers. And this is all tied to my
Yeah.
earlier point about how the internet makes money. With the introduction of the web, creators were able to publish their content online. You remember, how that was back then. And then with Web 2, these creators were then able to distribute their content through social platforms and then earn money through advertising. But the revenue shares never really worked in their favor. Like you really had to grind with the CPM structures to really earn anything. And with Web3, what's now known as the creator economy, creators have more options to monetize more content more than ever. And they don't want to be overly reliant on a single platform for their income. And this is the biggest shift in the mindset. The Web3 is decentralizing everything from the way consumers access and invest their money through things like crypto and decentralized finance, as well as how publishers and content creators are making money. Creators can earn directly from their communities, so the people who follow them on Instagram or maybe their Discord communities that they've built over time, and they're monetizing and earning directly through patronage models, and that can be through direct payments like a subscription feature on a platform or through a site like Patreon, which works economically more in the creator's favor than the traditional advertising model. And I've seen how Gen Z really kind of put money where their mouth is. And so that's kind of what I was referring to earlier about this mental model really shifting. And at Brave, creators can get verified, which will allow them to earn that, our basic attention token, from many different platforms, whether they're streaming on Twitch or publishing on YouTube. And since 2017, Brave has grown a base of 1.3 million verified creators who are accepting that as a form of payment. And so we're supportive of creators earning income from across the entire web, and we want to enable them to do so because I think that it's a virtuous cycle where users who are using Brave as the browser and earning that in return, and then they're contributing that token to creators so that they can earn from this token, which is agnostic. It's an agnostic form of payment. When it comes to what platform that they're earning from.
Yeah, it really feels creators are having more control over their destiny than ever before. It's mostly about, am I right about this? That it's creating excellent content instead of, I guess it always was, but instead of worrying about being captive to a certain platform or making money or revenue only from one place. Am I thinking about that right?
Yeah, and it actually gets them closer to their communities, which then allows them to be more authentic because they're not trying to be, they're not catering to a platform. They're actually catering to the people that they're talking to.
Okay. I'm gonna totally shift gears here, out of out of Web3 because you and I have worked on some really interesting marketing challenges together. When we worked together at Amazon Grocery, this was before COVID, and so like we weren't ordering groceries three times a day at that point. There were reports that were coming out that grocery delivery might be a big thing. It might be used by more than 4% of the population or whatever. This was an interesting marketing challenge for us because you didn't think about Amazon as a grocery company. You thought of as like and at least I did, and I thought of it as you just buy any good you want and it's shipped to your house. So when you think back to Amazon grocery, kind of a two-part question. What did you what did you learn about marketing there? And then also, which do you think was a bigger challenge? Was it convincing people that grocery delivery was a good thing, or convincing people to trust Amazon for groceries? And keep in mind, when we started working on this, it was before Amazon acquired Whole Foods.
Yeah. Um, the difference between Amazon grocery and then grocery shopping in general. I think about that as apples and oranges in comparison, but there's a marketing best practice that holds true, which is two things. One is knowing your customer, and then two, understanding their needs and motivations. When you're trying to convince anyone, whether you're talking to a friend about politics or discussing strategy with colleagues, you'll never be successful when you're trying to force your own ideas and assumptions onto them. Most people see the
Hmm.
push side of marketing, which is, the splashy TV commercials that you see while you're watching your favorite show, or the pretty billboards that you see when you're driving, or the messages that you get through emails and notifications. What many people don't realize is the steps that marketers take before all of that, which is the market research and the focus groups, how we end up synthesizing insights and learnings before we take all of that actions. And you may remember some of those focus groups that we participated in together. And that is what I learned the most during our time at Amazon. We learned so much by, about why consumers were wary of grocery delivery in general. And then, learning about their feelings about it and how it was different when it was, putting Amazon in the middle of all of that, when they're the ones delivering the groceries, which then led to how we talked about why grocery shopping fills a specific need or a use case or for a specific persona. And so, that's the main thing that I learned is the value of understanding your customer.
Yeah, it's such an important thing. I mean, that's something that we preach as marketers, but we don't always practice. I mean, in addition to marketing, I have an analytics background, and and looking at data, from country X to country Y, I couldn't always make sense of it. And then when you dig deeper into a customer, you learn that in some countries people just have smaller refrigerators. So
Hmm.
like once you know that about your customers, it explains the data. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's interesting. How looping back to Brave for a sec, how do you think about user research in a Web3, in a Web3 world?
I think research becomes even more important because assuming that you don't have all this attributable data, you can take directional data and provide context through user research. And so this is again what's old is new again. User research used to play a very heavy role in how products are developed, and that's how CPG companies have made so much money by marketing sugar water to people because they really dug into what people were motivated by and how to position a very simple product for them. And I think we lost a little bit of that in tech because we had this luxury of accessing such intimate information. And as that starts
Hmm.
to go away, we're going to have to go back to the basics and start actually talking to customers and actually understanding what their needs and motivations are versus making assumptions based on the data that we're seeing.
Yeah, I was just talking to someone yesterday in the context of an interview, and she was talking about product market fit for this health technology company, and she wasn't able to figure that out until she talked to like 200 people. And then they finally figured out who the heck actually needs this thing, and it became their first sale. I
Yeah.
totally agree with that.
And this
Um,
goes back to
you
just
know,
as humans, we try to make sense of our decisions by talking to people. Like before you buy a house or any big life decisions, you consult the people around you, whether it's your friends or your parents or other, people that you trust. And marketing is no different. The more, context and input you get from people who should have a stake in the decision, the more effective the output will be.
I agree with that. And along those lines, if somebody's listening to this and they're marketing a brand, and they want to achieve the level of trust for a, let's say, a Brave browser. I don't know what you call it, a braver coming, and like achieving that level of trust to give consent to an ad or something like that. What should the manager of a brand be thinking about, or a marketer of a brand be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, building trust is all about making people feel that you understand them. And so when you start asking questions, or um, there's this whole notion of the intent of wanting to know where people are coming from. And when you make people feel that way, that's the double-sided part of building a brand. So I see building brand in two parts. One is you're filling a functional need through a very, a very utilitarian point of the product. So I need to access the internet, and a browser will fill that need functionally. But the emotionals part is the other half of what is important in building a brand, and that's all about how does your product make people feel, and does your product make people feel secure? Do they feel like they can trust you with how they're browsing the internet and not having intimate access to your data? And so the emotional part is really important.
Totally. Um, let's shift from marketing to kind of like running a marketing team, or being part of a marketing team, or being part of a company. When we reconnected, and we're sort of syncing up for this podcast, and relating stories about COVID and working from home and all that stuff. Um, Brave, I understand, is a totally decentralized workforce, right? Like there's no office. Can you sort of talk about the pros and cons of that, and then also, do you notice any differences between that and like working at another company, maybe Amazon or whoever, which started as a full-time in-office endeavor, and like the approach of moving to hybrid or out of office versus just out of the gate, the whole company's out of office.
Yeah. So Brave was a decentralized workforce even before COVID, meaning we have offices around the world, but mostly it's a work from home culture. And I will say that I learned so much at Amazon about process, like things like monthly business reviews, the document writing culture, and other mechanisms that allowed us to be operationally efficient in everything we did. And that training has prepared me really well for working from home, both during the pandemic as well as entering this decentralized workforce. Because I do think that those mechanisms are needed, and as long as those mechanisms exist, the work from home culture can work really well, and you get the best of both worlds, because you have the flexibility, especially for working parents, but also knowing when process and operations are needed to do good work. So as an example, we just had an offsite for our marketing team so that we can build those relationships face to face. There are certain benefits to in person and having that in real life experience. And as long as there are processes like that where you incorporate that, regularly throughout the year, I do think that this decentralized workforce is the future of working. It's just a very effective and efficient way as long as those mechanisms are in place.
Yeah, I'm really excited about hybrid for me personally, because I feel like for me and for my team, we are super productive when we're away from the office, working at home, and at the same time when we're able to get together, and we're now getting together once or twice a week in the office. If you're local to one of the offices, there's like that time to be strategic and like smile at each other and have those, like, I don't know, like molecules interact or whatever. That's really important. So that's good. So you're getting together as a marketing team in person and offsite, maybe not as regularly as I am, but that's still an essential part of what you're doing.
Yes, and we also get together as a company once a year, and that also allows us to interact with other departments in the organization, which is beneficial.
All right.
I do think that this, flexible, decentralized workforce is also a strong recruiting factor because people want the best of both worlds, where you have the flexibility to work from home to manage all the things in your life, but also just to have the downtime to be able to focus and work, write a document or code or whatever it is that you need to do that doesn't require other people's input, because that is on the flip side, the challenge of being in an office. You're constantly tackling and context shifting, and it's easy to get distracted. And so depending on your working style, it can be very hard to work in office too, and it is something that I think the upcoming generation is looking for, is more of that flexibility.
Annie, you mentioned being a working mother, and I recommend anyone to follow you on Twitter and your other social channels because you're very open and candid about the joys and tribulations of being a working mother. Um, at the beginning of last year, you wrote a very heartfelt article in Adweek, and it wasn't about being a working mother exactly. You were asking people to ask how you're doing as an Asian American woman and not to ask you where you're from. Why did you write that article? And since then, what progress, if any, have you seen for you personally, or what you wrote about?
Yeah. So when the Atlanta shootings happened, couldn't sleep that night. And I had written that published piece on Adweek, originally for the intention of Women's History Month and posting it later that month in March. And so I thought I had more time to edit. And after putting my daughter to sleep that night, I learned about the massacres and that we were publishing the next day. And so I ended up staying up until 4 a.m. editing. And because the whole incident just shook me to my core, you'll find a lot of emotion in some of the context that ended up being published. And the reason why I felt compelled to write it is actually very personal. Because my dad passed away when I was young. I am an only child, so I don't have siblings, and have relied on my village to lift me up throughout my entire life and career, and I continue to do until this day. Something I've realized is that I'd been repressing my feelings for so long, and even the successful parts, but realized the need to tell the story not just for my own sake, but for my daughter's sake. And this whole reason is why the activism has been ignited within me, so that I can also help others, which is the part that I didn't realize was having an impact, was the response to the article and how other people felt like they felt heard, and it has encouraged them to also tell their stories. And so, in terms of progress, that's one of the progress that I've recognized for myself. But I would say there's so much progress that have yet to be made, because you still see these egregious things happening to this day. But the storytelling has increased too, which is amazing. And the storytelling is so cathartic for both myself and for others. Taking that action feels very healing, and we're collectively driving more awareness, but there's still so much work to be done. And having this dialogue is so important because it helps people understand. And when people understand, there's a lot more empathy. Education leads to compassion, and then empathy can lead to more meaningful change. And so I do think that we can continue to lift each other up by talking about it, both in the workplace and in our personal lives, so that we can collectively try to drive towards a better future.
I totally agree with that. We'll post a link to that article in the show description. And as a white man, I feel like I see people, and then I read your story and you're sharing, and I realize I'm not seeing everything I can or everything that I should. And I agree with you that more people, everyone telling their stories, educates, creates compassion, improves things. So thank you for that. And I recommend everybody read it.
Yeah,
And
and because this is a marketing podcast, the reason why this is so important is storytelling is always mapping back into how we're building trust, even at scale as a brand. And so, whether I'm telling a story about myself, the whole process of storytelling is so important for every brand that's trying to build a viable company. So, I just wanted to close with that because this is a marketing
yeah,
podcast.
yeah, 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 of course. I mean, it loops back to what we were saying about knowing your customer. That's step one, and then telling a story that's going to resonate with them. So, right on. Annie, thanks so much for being part of the podcast today, and great to talk to you.
Great. Thank you for having me.